Welcome back, guys. Going to do a quick update for you on the US Optics DRS. Now, you may have watched my initial video where I talk about the features and a bunch of the stuff in great depth. I'm not going to go through that all again for people who saw that one, but just to touch on some of the high overview points. This has got an aluminum housing with a greenish blue lens that's not quite as green blue as an RMR. The adjustment is accomplished via the two buttons that share a button cover on the left side of the optic. It is a very low riding dot that shares a profile similar to the Vortex Viper. It uses Trijicon RMR co-witness iron sights. It uses a CR2032 battery, and the windage and elevation is adjustable by dials that take like a jeweler's tip screwdriver. Now let's talk about things that I liked about this optic. Reliability was fine when it worked. There was one day, it was match day, when I went to the match, put the gun in my holster, turned the dot on, took some sight pictures, did some dry draws, and then the dot wasn't there. The battery died on me. I used the cheap Chinese battery, so I'm not really sure if it was an issue with the optic or an issue with the battery, but the Chinese battery that was included with it didn't ship. I don't know if I was the first one to use that battery or not, so I can't really fault the optic for that, but it was an issue. The problem gets into be that in a match environment, I can't unmount the optic and change the battery. As mentioned before, you have to unmount the optic, put it in the bottom just like the RMR, and remount the optic. Now, it's billed on the website as being always on and having a 2 to 3 year battery life expectancy. I got about 6 weeks, and that's with daily dry fire practice, a weekly range session, and that was all I got. This particular model, and this may not be true in the production models, this is a pre-production model. This has an auto shut off after about 6 hours, and it's still, the battery died. So your mileage may vary in that regard. Now, that's one thing that will probably keep me away from this optic for a defensive use pistol is the auto off, and honestly the battery life is kind of a hassle if you're gonna have to change it multiple times a year. Now, the window size is comparable to an RMR, but it is wider and it makes it look much bigger when you compare them side by side. Now, the problem is it's a 2 MOA dot, and the Trijicon RMR Type 2 gets significantly brighter, and that was honestly a drawback I had when I brought this to the range trying to shoot some B-roll film that ultimately never happened. Was conditions were weird. I couldn't get the dot dialed up bright enough to my satisfaction to do USPSA style shooting I was trying to do that day. So I ended up using my Delta Point Pro. Now, you keep hearing me talk about RMRs and Delta Point Pros, and that's probably not fair for a budget optic, as this optic sells at US Optics website for about $250 on a Picatinny rail mount. Now, at that price point, it's really going to be competing against things like the Burris Fastfire 3, the Vortex Viper or Vortex Venom, and things like that. Now, I don't own any of the other budget-conscious optics, so I can't really comment how it performs in the segment. I can say that I do prefer the RMR Type 2 and the Delta Point Pro to it. Some things that I do really like about this, I mentioned the window size, but actual clarity of the window. It does not distort around the edges. Now, if you've ever looked through an RMR Type 2, you'll notice that as you move the dot around, you'll see kind of things enlarge and shrink back to normal size around the edges of the window. This optic doesn't magnify anything around the edges, so I definitely give the glass and window big thumbs up over the RMR Type 2. Another downside that I talked about in the first video is that this ships on a Picatinny rail mount, which is great if you want to mount it on an RMR. Not great if you want to mount it on a pistol. So if you buy this optic specifically for a pistol, you're going to need to buy some screws for it. The screws you're going to need are going to be an M.5 by 3 by 7, I believe is what it is. I'll put a link to the Amazon thing in the description. As far as durability is concerned, the optic is held up great. The glass didn't get scratched at all. The housing did take some nicks from brass ejecting and hitting it, but it's no worse than any other optic that I've tried. So the US Optics DRS is a decent dot for somebody who's curious about getting into the dot game. If you've never shot dots before, this is a decent one to try. The window is gonna be a little bit small and the dot is gonna be a little bit fine. I do think that for pistols, a larger dot is probably better to a point. Something like a 5 or 6 MOA I think is gonna have advantages against something that's like a 2 MOA that you can't get bright enough to bloom and appear to be bigger. But all in all, the US Optics dot is not a bad choice. So if you have questions, anything I didn't touch on the video, I'm happy to expand on all this. Please leave a comment below and we can start a conversation. As always, I appreciate you guys and I will catch you on the next one. Thanks, guys.